everybody. My name is Paul Waddell. I met Waddell at a presentation I was giving at the Green Living Expo at the ASP Showgrounds not so long ago, and he asked me to come along and talk to you guys about electro-pollution, and that's what I do. I measure people's homes and businesses and then suggest ways of remediation. So we're going to talk, it's a very, very, very big subject, and there's a real lot to get through. The slides will be available afterwards, I think, through Manuel, so everything that goes up on the screen you should be able to get access to. But first thing I'd like to do is if I can have 3 volunteers, please. I'd like to have 3 really tech-savvy people who are prepared to come and sit down here for a short period of time, not for too long. Anybody game? So yeah, please come down. Okay, so you guys down here, you have very unfortunately either had a smart meter on your bedroom wall, or you may have been chemically sensitive for a number of years and were underneath some very high voltage power lines and became electrosensitive, or maybe at high school, and this happened to my son, you're sitting very close to a Wi-Fi router and all of a sudden you start getting pressure in your head and headaches and feeling really unwell. And so it could be any one of these causes, but what's happened is that for you 3 people here, you have now become electrosensitive. Okay? And what I'd like to try and do is just explore the dynamic between you guys and the rest of the population, because it's estimated that 3% of the population are electrosensitive, and relatively highly electrosensitive, and up to 30 or 40% have mild electrosensitivity. Okay? So for the 3 people down here at your home, this is how your life will be from now on. Okay, so just see how that feels for you. You won't have anything that's wireless. Okay, no smartphone, no Wi-Fi, no cordless phones, and if you do have a smart meter, it's going to cause you quite a lot of pain. And we'll talk about smart meters a little bit later. So in your home environment, you've got to make some really serious changes, and even to the point where you may have to turn off the electrical power for significant parts of the time, because I know people are electrosensitive and they can't bear to have the power turned on in their home because it hurts them, physically hurts them. Okay, so maybe for portions of the day you're going to have to do that. Now, when you go to leave the home, the car that you drive in is possibly going to make you feel really unwell. As you drive down the street, any cell phone towers you drive past may cause physical pain. And to go to a public library or go on a bus or a train where there's now Wi-Fi on the buses and trains, that's going to be really disturbing. It may cause pain, but it also may cause mental confusion. I know one lady who, if she gets exposed to a lot of this stuff, she can't string words together. It just goes. She just can't put a sentence together. So, how do you feel now? Not too good. Okay, and so and then you come to an environment like this. There's Wi-Fi all through here. It may mean that you can't come to a place like this. Okay, so, and do you think you could understand what they're going through? Is that, could that be on the radar scope for you? It's like, having a smartphone right next to you causes physical pain, mental confusion, memory loss, maybe heart palpitations. Could you kind of cope with, a friend that was like that? No, of course not. You couldn't understand it all. And this is the problem with electrosensitive people in our environment. And this is where, because we're talking about sociology, I wanted to bring a bit of a human part into this before we start talking about all the technical stuff. And this is the reality for a big number of people. And I get phone calls once or twice a week sometimes, people that have just discovered that they're electrosensitive and they're going through hell. They're in pain, their confusion, what do I do? And these people are getting very, very isolated from society, and typically they spend a lot of money trying to remediate things or whatever. They can't, the next thing is, what would you guys do for a job? You can't get a degree because you can't come to university. You can't work anywhere where there's Wi-Fi or cordless phones or cell phones. You'd have trouble going on public transport. What would you do? Work on a farm? Yep, and then the New Zealand government is bringing in the Rural Wi-Fi Initiative so that every farm in the country can get Wi-Fi. And all of the cows have got RFID chips in them. And as they go through an RFID scanner, if you were near that, you'd feel really unwell. So You know, this is a real problem. And if we take the New Zealand population as it stands at the moment, and let's look forward 20 or 30 years' time, and this is where I personally think maybe our society is going to go. We're going to have a society of have-nots, for a want of one word, and haves, technically. And so what's going to happen for people like this when they realise that they can't actually cope in society? And I think your answer is probably quite a good one, is that we're going to have communities of artisan people who grow organic food maybe and live without technology but provide the society with other things, maybe organic food or something like that, or handcrafted things. But if we say 3% of New Zealand, that's actually the population of Dunedin. Okay, so maybe we're going to have an enclave where there is no Wi-Fi, no cordless phones, you know, no microwave transmissions. And let's say, you know, you've got the Prime Minister, whoever that's going to be soon, or somebody else, head of a major corporation or something, and all of a sudden they become electrosensitive. What's going to happen to them? They're going to have to give up their life, maybe their job, and maybe move to this other community. You know, what kind of social problems are we going to have with these kind of changes? So anyway, thank you very much for you guys for helping me out. But does this gel with any of you? Do you start to get a feeling of these people are down here, they're quite isolated on purpose, because that's what this is like. People can be misdiagnosed, that, you know, they go to the doctor and they don't realise they're electrosensitive. I believe this happens all the time. I think it's a factor in youth suicide and suicide, and I think it's also a factor in the number of people that are in our psychiatric institutions or under psychiatric care. I think quite a few of them are electrosensitive and nobody recognises it. So thank you guys. And so let's just look at electrosensitivity. It's a condition that can develop when people are exposed to all of these things. In Sweden, it's actually recognised as a disability, and this is where I came up with the 3%. That's their figure in Sweden. But possibly up to 40% have some level of sensitivity. Recognised in other places, and these are the kind of symptoms: head and ear pain, headache, sleep disruption, and 70 to 80% of people don't sleep well now. Mental confusion, memory loss, especially short-term memory, muscle aches and pains, heart palpitations. We had a lady came for lunch at my place yesterday, and she gets quite strong heart palpitations if she's around electric and magnetic fields. And the thing I really want to stress is that this is not a psychiatric condition. The overriding thing in the health system in New Zealand today is that this is a psychiatric problem. I firmly believe that it is not. And if you would like to understand a little bit more about electrosensitivity, there's a very good website there, es-uk.info. And they put out a good newsletter, and very informative, lots of people over there. So one lady that's done a lot of research, and this is Magda Havis. YouTube search and you'll find lots and lots of videos. She's done a lot of work. She's professor in Canada. And what we're looking at here is the real-time monitoring of heartbeat. Anybody know what DECT is? Digital Enhanced Communication Technology. This is basically a cordless phone. All the latest cordless phones are DECT or DECT phones. And what we're seeing is that in subject B, this person is highly electrosensitive and they're reacting to just having a cordless phone next to them. And you can see the change in their heartbeats when it's turned off and on. Now this is very unusual for electrosensitive people. Often the symptoms take a long time to come on. It might be an hour or half an hour or possibly more before people start feeling really shitty if they get into a situation where there's high electromagnetic fields. But this person is actually highly responsive. And this is a graph looking at distance from a cell phone tower compared to symptoms. And the interesting thing, I guess, is that all of the ones in red are what's associated with rapid aging syndrome. And you see that there's most of them. And so we're bombarding ourselves with these very unnatural fields and frequencies, and we're actually making real changes to how we're responding and our aging. And we'll look at a lot of the electrical symptoms later on. So what we'll talk about now is the four main kinds of electropollution that I deal with when I go and test. The first is magnetic fields, and the image there gives you a pretty good idea of where they come from. High voltage power lines, wherever you've got current running on wires, you'll have a magnetic field. If you've just got voltage in the wire, you'll have voltage and virtually no magnetic field. When you're using the electricity, you'll get current flow and then you get magnetic fields. Okay, so in Auckland, I don't know if any of you have noticed, especially out northwest, there's high voltage power lines right over the top of houses. Personally, I believe that's criminal, and I've measured a number of those houses. And what the real estate agents tell me is that people don't stay in those houses very long. They get, 1 to 2 to 3 years. So a family member gets very ill and they move on. But people buy them because they're very inexpensive. So those are the kind of distances that you should be from some of these things to be relatively safe from magnetic fields. If I'm looking at a house, it can indicate a wiring problem. Older homes, if there is metal pipes bringing the water in, sometimes you can get magnetic fields coming in on these water pipes, and that can be a really serious problem. One house I can think of, there was about 50 milligauss around a desk where this lady would work, and that was caused from current flowing on the water pipes coming in, and we put a 2 metre section of plastic hose in, we cut the pipe, put the plastic hose in, and that dropped the fields right back to normal. And from my perspective, I work with the building biology guidelines, and a safe level is less than 1 milligauss. The New Zealand standard is 2,000 milligauss. Okay, there's a real disconnect between these standards, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Electric underfloor heating, I've measured up to 500 milligauss, and this is where young children would play on the floor. And some of the very first research into magnetic fields was done by Wertheimer and Lima, and they were finding that between 3 to 4 milligauss, they saw a significant increase in childhood leukemia around high voltage power lines. So, and this is where less than 1 milligauss sort of came in. Oven or cooktop, you can have 100 milligauss. Electric fields. Okay, this, I would imagine there would be lots of electric fields around this. And what I'd like to show you now is how I measure electric fields. And this is something, if you guys have got a multimeter, and this is just a relatively simple electrician's multimeter, one of the leads is going to earth through the 3-pin plug, and the other I've just made this so I can hold on to it easily. So standing, I'm a little bit insulated because I've got rubber-soled shoes on, but I'm getting about 0.6 of a volt standing here as it's the voltage that's induced in me as an antenna. There's 70–80% water in me, a lot of electrolyte salts, and so I'm about 0.7 of a volt. What I'm looking for in somebody's home is less than half a volt. I often get 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 12 volts on a bed. If you have that, that can be really quite serious. And so this young lady over here has very kindly allowed me to touch her laptop, and I'm currently getting 100 volts touching her laptop. Okay, and that's quite a serious issue, and for her allowing me to do that, I'm actually going to give her later on, I'll send her a cord that she can plug in that will reduce that down to half a 1 volt. But the issue with, and I find this mostly with older Mac notebooks, is the issue with that is when you're touching that, you've got 100 volts potential at your fingers. It actually creates a current running up and across your arm and across your chest. And this is really seriously not good for heart, and I think for breast cancer also. So this is really quite serious, and this is something that Apple have finally done something about. The two ladies next door, I've tested theirs as well, and they're oh, sorry, this one and this one, and they're roughly about 1 volt, which is about normal. And I think your one was the newest, and it actually the voltage dropped down. The very latest Mac notebooks with the power supply on, they've actually earthed them right up to the metal case, which is great. So this is showing you here what we're doing. This is what we call body voltage, and if you can get a multimeter, they're relatively inexpensive. It's a really, really great thing to do to see what's around in your environment. As I say, you want to be half a volt on your bed if you can achieve that. Okay, so let's talk about electric fields. We want to get less than half volt, and also, by the way, I'm measuring volts AC, not DC, when we're measuring this. So I really am measuring the induced voltage from the electrical power, which is running at 50 hertz in their wiring. And on my meter, I can actually see the frequency as well, so I know that I'm actually measuring 50 hertz. Electric blanket, up to 80 volts AC. So I highly recommend that you do not sleep with an electric blanket on your bed. Okay, if you have to have an electric blanket, please turn it off at the wall before you get into bed. These voltages can be really, really quite serious in how they affect people. And as I say, you know, I measure places where you spend time. Okay, so how to reduce exposure? Distance. And this is kind of advice for you guys, is like keep power cables away from your body. If you're sitting at a desk, look under the desk and see where the power cables are. You don't want to have them within like half a metre of your body. If you can put your foot on a power cable under the desk where you're sitting, your body voltage will go up to 10 or 12 volts probably, or maybe more. So this is seriously not good, and it's something just to be aware of. Switch off at the wall. In a bedroom, my recommendation is people have nothing plugged in and turned on in their bedroom, especially next to their bed, but preferably in the whole bedroom. And this will lower the voltage in the room so that you can sleep better. Okay. The other way is by switching off circuits. You can switch off the circuit breakers with dry fingers, and you can install automated demand switches, which is a device that will automatically turn these circuits off. And another way of doing this to some degree is earthing. Anybody heard of earthing? There are earthing products you can buy, and they have either conductive rubber mats you can put under your keyboard, or silver thread in bedding or blankets. And there's a wire that runs back to an earth point, and by touching these things, your voltage will drop down significantly. And that literally, for the lady with the laptop here, all I'm going to provide her with is a cable that earths the chassis of her laptop back to ground, and that will drop the voltage out of it and make it a lot safer. But just, I guess, while I'm talking about laptops, so also the other thing you need to be aware of, you know, I was talking about magnetic fields, something I forgot to say. When your fingers are on the keyboard of a laptop, you'll be getting 8, 10, 12, 14 milligauss of magnetic field. Okay, that's very commonly measured on the keyboard of a laptop. So just having your fingers on the laptop is beyond what is considered safe from my perspective. Okay, microwave radiation. So this is getting into the kind of stuff that you guys really like. Okay, so you can see there we've got a cell phone tower, a DEC or cordless phone, your smartphone, wireless baby monitors. These are seriously bad. And Wi-Fi, also not great. And then anybody know what a smart meter is? Anybody had an experience with a smart meter or an advanced meter? Okay, so that grey blob sort of down the bottom there, that's one of the new advanced power meters that they're introducing into everybody. And these things transmit sometimes up to every 30 seconds, sometimes 2 or 3 times an hour, sometimes 3 or 4 times a day. But what I'm finding from my perspective is that where these things are especially mounted near a bedroom, there seems to be a significant number of people that were not electrosensitive who become electrosensitive because of the pulses out of these things. They seem to be really, really bad at affecting people, and the government has held, well, not so much the government, but the electrical companies are hell-bent on putting these on everybody's house. And I think they're up to 60 or 70% saturation already. So there is a good website you can go to, stopsmartmeters.org.nz. If you have one on your house and you want to do something about it, you need to ask to have the transmitting modem removed. But if you go to that website, there's a lot of information about that. But typically, they're really not a great thing. Okay, so cell phones, Wi-Fi, cordless phones, and it's where we're transferring information through the air. Okay, so when we talk about these things, we talk about the carrier signal. So, you know, a smartphone, a Vodafone smartphone is about 920 megahertz. Telecom is 850 megahertz. These are the carrier frequencies. And Wi-Fi is either 2.45 or 5.8 gigahertz. So these are the carrier frequencies that we talk about. But the way that the data is actually sent is by either modulation or by packets of data being pulsed. And so cell phone signals modulate at 20 to 50 hertz. So this is a bit of a demonstration or a picture of what we're talking about here. So the very top part, you've actually got the signal you want to transmit. The middle is the carrier frequency, very high frequency, and then they modulate that information on top of the carrier frequency. So that's how they put some of the data in that is being sent to your smartphone or through Wi-Fi. But that's not all. the next thing they do is they also pulse this frequency. In other words, they turn it off and on very quickly. And it seems to be the rapid rise and fall of the pulses that also affects people very, very negatively. And so, as I say, signal interrupted, and the main pulse frequencies are 8.33 hertz and 1,736 hertz. And then also to achieve multiple connections, because I think a cell phone tower can hold 7 connections per channel, they also pulse it at 217 hertz. So we've got this modulated frequency being pulsed in all these different ways. That graphic down the bottom is a sort of a bit of an idea of what's happening. The basic thing about those frequencies is that the 20 to 50 hertz, the 80 hertz, or the 1.73 kilohertz, they're either in the biologically or our biological range, where our biology is up to about 100 hertz, and we'll look at dirty electricity a little bit later on, but the dirty electricity frequency ranges from 1.7 kilohertz to 100 kilohertz as being biologically active. So all of these pulse rates and modulation rates are in frequency ranges that are very biologically active to us. And maybe some of the things that hopefully some smart people can do in the future is change this so that they're out of these dangerous areas. Okay, so it's the modulation and pulses that cause the damage, particularly to cell membranes, but also to DNA. And all organisms will have a stress response to these artificial frequencies. Okay, so what is a safe level of microwave radiation? They've known for over 40 years that it causes breaches to the blood-brain barrier, and the blood-brain barrier stops any toxins in the blood from getting into the main part of the brain. And how they know that this gets through is that they put dye in the blood, expose an animal, a rat possibly, and then after a short period of time, they kill and dissect the brain, and that on an unexposed animal, the dye will not be in the brain. One that's been affected, the dye will leach into the brain. And so for a long time, we've actually known that this causes this problem. And these leakages in the blood-brain barrier are thought to cause chronic health issues. Okay, so there's also, I don't know if you've seen an image like this, but this is the thermal image of what's happening in a brain, or the head, when you've got a cordless phone there. I'll explain what that graphic is there. The one that says sham, that's an unexposed DNA molecule, I guess, if I get this correct. And the one in the middle is the same, but being exposed to 1,600 chest X-rays. So that's the comet tail that you see streaking off behind the molecule is the damage to the DNA. It's the way they've found being able to visually see what's happening to the DNA. And of course, the one on the right is 24 hours exposure to fairly high output, but at the cell phone frequencies. And so, definitely we can show that there is damage to DNA from these things. Looking at a case study now, and in Brazil, in the third largest city, Belo Horizonte, they did this study over 10 years, and they looked at 856 cell phone towers, and what they did is they geolocated where people were living when they were diagnosed with cancer. And then they also geolocated where the cell phone towers were. And what they found was that, and that bullseye graph is sort of showing the density with range from, or distance from the cell phone tower, was that virtually half of the people that were diagnosed with cancer were living within 100 metres of a cell phone tower. And this is one of the more shocking sort of studies they've done this. There are numerous ones. And the range of measurement they were getting was between 8,000 and 31,000 microwatts per square metre. And when I measure a cell phone tower, that's very much within the range I'll get. Even in somebody's home, I'll be getting 8,000 microwatts if they're a couple hundred metres away from a cell phone tower. So this is the measurements they're getting here are very, very real. So what I'll do now is I'll show you this is the instrument I use for measuring microwave radiation. Sorry, it's clearly quite strong in here. I've had to go up to the very strongest setting. And you can see if I walk around, there's hot spots and cold spots, and this is quite typical. You're getting interference patterns, blocking it out. Actually, if I put my hand up there, and that's 10,000 microwatts per square metre. Okay, so what we're getting in here is equivalent to what they're talking about in that study. Okay, I didn't test that before, so I didn't really know what was happening, but it's you know, that's at a level that I consider to be quite strong. And if that was in a home, I'd be really concerned. And yet you guys spend all day in that environment, and at school, you know, I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on. So we've got a cordless phone there, and everybody got cordless phones? Okay, so just to give you an idea of a comparator, at 2 metres distance from the base of a cordless phone, that's the equivalent to about 20,000 microwatts. Okay, so a cordless phone is very, very, very strong when you're close to it. And if you're within a metre of it, yeah, a metre about 20,000 microwatts. At about 2 metres, you're probably down to 10, 12,000 microwatts. So again, I don't recommend people have cordless phones. The old style corded phone is far safer. And that meter that I showed you, if I link that with the other meter I've got there, the yellow one, and a GPS tracker, it's a fairly serious piece of kit, and I can actually geolocate or geomap what's happening around. And this is a where I've dropped the data logged information into Google Maps. And so if you're driving along Remuera Road there, you can see where it says Remuera, you can see where the cell phone towers are, and as I was driving down the road, you can see the spikes. And those spikes, the very tallest spikes, are about 30,000 microwatts. And so you know, this is, you know, it's not until you start seeing a graphic representation of what's around you, maybe that starts to click as to what's around you all the time. And if you look at a cell phone map of Auckland City, there are between 200 and 300 cell phone towers within a 1 kilometre radius of downtown Auckland. You know, we really have got a lot of this stuff around us. And you know, driving along the waterfront, the towers along there seem to be very, very strong. Okay, so how to reduce microwave radiation? Eliminate or reduce the polluting source. As I said before, use a wired option. Is far, far safer than having something wireless, which completely goes against what your generation is really into. I know. I have a son. I understand. But you know, at a minimum, turn off your Wi-Fi at the router and the device before you sleep. Don't just leave the stuff running when you're sleeping. When you sleep is when you rest and recover and regenerate. It's incredibly important that you're in a very, very low electro-pollution environment when you're sleeping. Very, very important. Okay, be very conscious of your surroundings. There are cafes and shops and blocks of shops that I tend to avoid now because they've got cell phone towers on top of them. And you know, who wants to go and sit in a cafe and just get bombarded with this stuff? Practice safe cell phone use. Text, use a speakerphone. The very strongest source of microwave radiation you'll ever get is holding a phone to your ear. And if you look in any of the manuals from the manufacturers, you'll find that they all, literally every single one of them, say that you should not have a cell phone closer than either 15mm to 25mm from your body at any time whatsoever. Okay? And that's what the manufacturer says, and it's cover your ass from their perspective, because they know that if somebody gets brain cancer, you know, brain tumour or prostate cancer from having a phone in their back pocket or something like that, they can say, look, have you ever had it closer than 15mm? And you go, yeah, sure, it was in my pocket. We go, forget any court case. And this is, but the reality is they know that if it's that close, it totally breaches the SARS limits, the specific absorption rate limits that are set, and it's their get out of jail free card. So, but you know, even they recognise that this stuff is harmful. So have a look at on your iPhone. I think you've got to go into I think you can look and it's right at the very back of the manual. But if you want to know a little bit more, my website is safespace.net.nz. If you go to the resources page, at the top of the page, there's a 3-page info sheet you can download about how to be safer. And I'd recommend you do that. The other thing you can use is an air tube headset. I have one here. That's what I use. The thing about that is that the last 150 mil is actually a rubber tube, a hose. And the sound is made down here at a little speaker, and all that goes between there is actually the sound waves. So there's no electromagnetic signal right at your head. That's another way that you can significantly reduce what's being put into your head. I mean, today, I was in a bit of a panic to get here today. Actually, I thought I was going to be late. And the reason for that was I had this lady ring me up, and her husband, who's a property developer, who's on the cell phone all day, every day, has just been diagnosed with a brain tumour. And she's like, please, I've been told this is probably being caused from the cell phone. What do I do? I mean, look, this was today, just before I came here. This is serious, serious stuff we're talking about. Okay, laptops and tablets should not be used on the lap. On a desk or something is certainly better. With a remote keyboard and mouse, wired, is even better. Bluetooth, also quite strong. When it's very close to you, it's also quite strong. So a Bluetooth headset, Bluetooth speakers, not great. Okay, ladies, never put a laptop in your bra. I see everybody reaching for the girls. Don't do it. It's really, really bad. I'll show you some photos later on. And young girls sleep with cell phones under the pillow so they can hear the text come through and respond. If you have sisters or even brothers or people that do this, please stop them from doing it. This is seriously bad. There's a big increase in the number of young children that are getting brain tumours. Okay, and microwave ovens, also very, very, very strong. Best not to use them, but if you do, don't just step away a little bit, but actually go out of the room and even go out into the 2 rooms away. It's better to have a good 8 or 10 or 12 metres away from them because they're very, very strong. Now, in Russia, when microwave ovens were first invented, the Russians banned them because they were they said they're totally, totally unsafe. And it's only been since commercialisation has hit Russia that they've actually gone back in. But yeah, and get the transmitting removed from your smart meter. Highly recommend this. So dirty electricity. Anybody ever heard of that? It's actually an industry term, or dirty power. And it's caused by transients and harmonics. So the transients are little voltage spikes, and the harmonics are literally a harmonic that's created on the wires. And it's often caused by the appliances you plug in. And so I'm going to demonstrate dirty electricity here to some degree to you now, but this is the meter. It's plugged in here that I use to measure dirty electricity. And what I'm looking for is less than 50 is okay, and less than 35 is optimal. And at the moment, it's reading fairly close to what's up there. We're 410. So this is really quite strong. And it tends to mess with memory and ability to think, and ADD, ADHD, a lot of things like that can be linked back to dirty electricity. So if you're in a high dirty electricity environment and you're trying to study, that probably wouldn't be that great. So what I'm going to demonstrate is one way that you can have a play yourself and go around your home and just sort of see. Now this won't actually measure the dirty electricity per se, but it will show you some of the harmonics that are coming off some devices. So this is literally just a little AM, FM transistor radio, okay? And I've set it on the AM band, and I'll turn it on. And I've wound it right down to the bottom, 530 megahertz, so it's off station. I'm going to turn that on. Yeah. And so there's not too much here, but if I go over here, start to hear some frequencies. Okay, so those are frequencies in the air that your body will be picking up and responding negatively to. But this is an energy-saving bulb. I'll start out here. Hear the buzz? Actually, when I did this at home, outside of an environment where there's a lot of buzz happening, because there is a lot of buzz in here, I could actually hear the thing out to about here. But because there's so much other electronic stuff here, it's only actually quite close, you can hear it. I'll turn it on again. And the main frequency that's coming out of that is about 50 kilohertz. That's the frequency that the power supply is running at, but there's all kinds of other frequencies coming out of it. These things are really, really unsafe, I think, is the word to use. The government's pushing them, the Greens are pushing them, everybody's pushing them, but personally, I would not have these in my home. I don't have them in my home, and I don't recommend anybody has energy-saving bulbs. And we'll talk a little bit about that later as well, but the old-style incandescent, or you can now get energy-saving halogen light bulbs. Those are the only two that I think are okay. LED light bulbs will also have frequencies, and these, the curly CFL bulbs, are particularly wicked. An electrosensitive person would actually respond very, very badly to that. And also the fluorescent lights that we've got in here, these are also particularly not great either. Where dirty electricity comes from is the appliances that you plug in. So it can be that, you know, a computer might have a bad power supply, another one might have a good power supply and doesn't generate dirty electricity, but it's from the appliances you plug in. And also, if your neighbours have really bad devices, it can go out to the transformer and then back to your place. So often when I measure somebody's home, if we turn off everything in the home, it can still be really, really strong, and it'll be coming in off the street. And so, as I said, we measure with this microsurge meter, and those are the readings that we're looking to achieve. And so I've got an oscilloscope. I didn't have time to set it up here today to show you, but this is kind of what we're talking about. The red trace at the top is the transients. So this is the 50 hertz power with the 50 cycle taken out of it. So we're looking at what's left over once we filter out the 50 hertz of the main power supply. And you can see there's a few little spikes in there, and this is at 70 on that meter. So some of those higher spikes are the transients that are coming through. And the bottom, we're looking at a spectrum analysis. And the little dotted line that comes up on the left-hand side, the 1, that's at 1.7 kilohertz. So anything to the left-hand side of that is relatively okay. Anything to the right-hand side is not so good. That will go internally into the body and cause an issue. And we're now at 750 on the meter, and you can see the difference in the transients. We have a lot more transients, a lot more voltage spikes, and we've now got 2 new frequency spikes as well. One at about 13 kilohertz and the other one about 26 kilohertz. So these higher frequencies to the right-hand side, these are apparently what go into the body and cause the issue. And where I've been in places where we've had readings up to 2,000 GS on the meter, the way we fix it is by plugging in these little filters. And when you plug in a filter, often you need multiple filters, the kind of comments that people have made is that the whole atmosphere of the room just calms down and everything feels a lot calmer. And relatively sensitive people can really feel that there's this real zingy buzz in the air, and that's what seems to really affect people. Okay, so these are the kind of things it's linked to. Definitely cancer, MS, diabetes, ADD, ADHD. I have a friend in Sydney who has got MS. He was on canes, he could hardly walk, actually, and with degenerative MS, and he'd tried everything. And then he heard about dirty electricity, and he contacted the guy in America that makes these, Dave Stetzer, and this was a number of years ago, before they had 240 volt versions, and he made him up some special filters, sent them out, and within a month, my friend Steve was walking better without canes, and within a couple of months, he was almost back to being a normal person. And I'm not saying this is the same for every single person with MS by any stretch, but it seemed to be that his MS most definitely was really zinged up by dirty electricity. The building he lived in was very high. And he today holds down a full-time job. If you met him, you wouldn't believe that he had MS. The only thing, if he gets around a lot of microwave radiation or a lot of dirty electricity, his feet tend to drag a little bit when he's walking. And that's his first sign that there's a problem for him. But, you know, these, this dirty electricity is pretty much of all the kinds of electro-pollution, this is the one that is the least known and the least recognised, but I think is really quite a serious and important one. No government standards on this whatsoever, except for Kazakhstan and Russia, and the Russian Federation. They have actually, it's a government mandate that government buildings must be below 50 GS. And I've seen readings over 2,000. So we've talked a little bit about electro-sensitivity. We've talked about what is electro-pollution. Now we're going to look at our world. And this is a graphic example of what the world looks like, possibly if you could see what the electro-smog was like. So we've evolved in a very natural environment with ELF, or extreme low frequency direct current electromagnetic fields. And these are very, very, very strong wavelengths, or long wavelengths, up to 6,000 kilometres, I think. And our electromagnetic environment changes. The magnetic poles on the Earth have actually swapped north to south, south to north a number of times. And there is some thought that there have been extinction events around these changes, and we're actually due for a change. It might not be for the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 years, but within the cycle of our planet, we're actually overdue for a change of poles. As I said, the frequency range 0 to 80 is our normal frequency, and this is where I was looking at those pulsed frequencies before. Again, this is where some of those modulation and pulse frequencies. Lightning is probably the only other natural frequency that we have in our environment, and that's at 10 to 20 kilohertz. And as I was saying before, with the dirty electricity, the biologically harmful range, 1.7 kilohertz to 100 kilohertz. And alternating current that we have at the moment is very, very unnatural. Nikola Tesla, in about 1880 something, or Thomas Edison invented direct current, and he began electrifying houses in New York. But the problem was they had to have generating plants very close by, and they were coal-fired, and they made a lot of pollution. And Nikola Tesla came up with the idea of alternating current because it could be transmitted over great distance. But unfortunately, we are DC, and we'll look at that again a little bit later on. We're DC, and we really don't seem to respond very well to AC. Give you an idea, this is out of a book I'll show you in a minute. And this gives you some idea of the frequency range that we had pre-radio. I guess so 200 or 300 years ago, this is what we had. We had a little bit of Earth's magnetic field. We had lightning at 15 to 20,000 kilohertz, and then nothing up to visible light. This is the spectrum that we live in today. And this book was published in 1985, so what I could guarantee is that the height of those bars would now be a lot higher. The saturation of the electromagnetic spectrum is a lot more extreme now. And so we've really filled up our environment with stuff that is very, very unnatural. And the birds and the bees. So in the US, there's one area, but I think in a lot of areas, there are major problems with migratory birds. And actually the US, I forget the name of the department, but they're actually challenging the regulations in America, and they're probably more likely to have success than anybody else, because it's been written into legislation that we, the people, are not allowed to complain about anything to do with electromagnetic fields. It's specifically excluded. Even in New Zealand, it's excluded in the RMA. It actually says that you're not allowed to object to the placement of a cell phone tower on the basis of health. It's actually written in the legislation. And so, big problem with migratory birds, genetic damage to birds that nest or are near cell phone towers, colony collapse disorder with bees. There was an interesting experiment done where there were 8 hives of bees. In 4 of the hives, they put cordless phone bases turned on, so that we're getting this maybe 20,000 microwatts per square metre of microwave radiation. In those hives where the cell phone or cordless phone bases were, in 3 of the hives, only about 20 to 30% of the bees came back, and in 1 hive, not a single bee came back. And the thing that they think is happening is that the microwave radiation messes with their ability to navigate. So they just flew off and then couldn't come back. Also noticing stunted tree growth, and I think it's the Dutch elm disease in Europe. There's some thought now that is possibly coming in from electro-smog as well, not just air pollution. If you'd like to see an interesting movie about what we've just been talking about, on YouTube, Resonance Beings of Frequency, terrific movie, really, really good, highly recommend it. Okay, this is an American smart meter, And it's a little bit of a blurry image, but you can see that that plant definitely is not happy around that source of microwave radiation. It's browning off, dying off a little bit. Growth is not luxuriant. You look at the outer edges, the plant's sort of coping reasonably well, but very close to that strong source of microwave radiation, not happy. Okay, so coming back to where we're talking about the energy saving stuff, I thought just because we're talking about environment, let's talk about the latest sort of spin that people are putting on what's happening for us. Eco, everything's eco. Okay, does eco mean healthy? Well, in the case of these curly light bulbs or CFL light bulbs, I say definitely not. They have mercury in them. Unless they're recycled correctly, they're very, very unsafe in landfills and in an environment. But also you saw those frequencies that were emanating from them. Sensitive people respond very badly to that. Okay. The way of the future, wind power and solar power. I have to say to you that both of these are very, very poor when it comes to people's health. And that kind of sounds like a funny thing because everybody thinks, oh, wind power is the next big thing. But when they generate electricity through wind power, they can't get the speed of the armature synchronous with the grid. So what they do is they make AC power at a very funny frequency and voltage, then they rectify it back to DC, direct current, and then they run it through an inverter to make 240 volt, 50 hertz AC stable. But running it through those electronic processes puts incredible amounts of harmonic frequencies into it, way, way more than what we saw in that on the oscilloscope trace or what we heard from there. And there's some quite distinct evidence that people living within 7, 8, 10 kilometres of wind plants are getting these harmonic frequencies coming through the ground and are getting very ill from it. A lot of the conventional stuff is saying that where people are complaining about wind turbines, it's infrasound, which is low frequency sound. There's very, very little research being done about harmonics in the ground or ground currents, but I've seen some oscilloscope traces taken from the ground near wind power, and the frequency in the ground was very, very bad, and people are getting ill from it. Solar power. I personally think solar power is the way of the future, but I mean the issue for me is the inverter. You see there's a little box down there that says inverter. What that does is it takes the DC voltage and inverts it to 240 volts AC, which is what we use in the walls. Every inverter also generates massive amounts of dirty electricity. I've measured a number of houses that are off-grid, so they've just got solar panels with inverters. In every instance, those houses were between 1,600 and 2,000 GS units on that dirty electricity meter. Very, very unhealthy environments to live in. So where I say solar is the way of the future, I think if we have micro-generation, in other words, we're collecting solar power from the solar modules, we're storing that in batteries as DC voltage, and we're using that in houses as DC voltage, that is the perfect answer to this issue. And all of the appliances that we have can be, virtually all of them can run as DC devices. I mean, your laptops that you've got sitting here, they're all DC devices. That power supply that you plug in is the inverter or the charger that converts the AC to the DC. So if you take that out of the picture completely, you plug the laptop into the DC battery in your house, perfect. It'll work really well. So there's some real serious issues with the way that we're implementing wind power and solar power. Smart meters I've talked about a little bit. They're, I think, a serious health issue. And electric cars, I've measured a couple, and the electromagnetic fields and frequencies in these vehicles can be really quite strong to the point of being unhealthy. But some of them are better. But the real issue is the charger. The charger is just another inverter. And so typically what somebody would do is they'd come home with their electric car, park it in the garage, plug in the charger, and overnight while you're sleeping, the charger charges the car. Well, this is perfect. That sounds completely logical, right? But while you're sleeping, you're then going to be putting maybe 2,000 GS units of dirty electricity right through all the wiring in your house. Very, very, very unhealthy. Could possibly lead to quite serious health issues later on. So Does eco mean healthy? Not really. We haven't actually got to the point where we actually got on top of the stuff to make it actually healthy, but I believe we can. Smart or stupid? I used to be a marketing manager. For almost 10 years, I was a marketing manager for some fairly high-end products. And I kind of know how marketing works to some degree. It was a little while ago now, but labelling something smart is just, to me, it's just like, from the other side, because it's like, what's it saying? It's like, if you don't accept this, what are you, stupid? And the thing is, a lot of these smart devices are inherently not inherently bad for us. They can make us really unwell. And from the smart meter, we're going to get smart appliances soon. They will talk at the same frequency range as Wi-Fi. So you'll actually have a secondary Wi-Fi channel through your house, and the appliances will talk to the smart meter. You'll have all of these other things happening in your house, all talking together, and that's going to increase the level of microwave radiation in your home significantly. And I think this is going to be seriously bad for people's health. Smart grid, this is where on the left-hand side we've got the smart meter, and then we have what they call a mesh network. So all of the houses can talk to each other, and at the same time they relay the information back to the power company. And this is what's happening in New Zealand at the moment. We're putting all these smart meters, and so we're putting these communication points on our homes, and they are an enabling technology for the gateway to our homes. And so the interesting thing I think is going to be is who's going to own that gateway and what's going to happen at it. Is it the power companies that are going to own it, or is it the telecommunications companies, and what's going to go on? So but when we start looking at the next generation of cell phones, 5G or maybe 6G, they're talking about that being possibly more of a mesh network. And so what we may end up having is 5G modems in all of our smart meters in our homes. So then our homes become a cell phone tower. You know, this is where a lot of this technology is going, and personally I think it's quite dangerous. So as far as the smart grid goes, there's billions of dollars being spent, no proven cost return. I really don't understand why this big push is, but it seems to be what we're getting. And on the other side, from the people's perspective, we're getting a loss of privacy, because these things can actually spy on you. They can work out what you're doing in your home, what appliances you've got on, when you're home, when you're not home. There's actually been, the US police have been using them for surveillance, and they've busted a number of places where they've been growing dope. So they've had all these rooms decked out growing, and because of the power consumption for the Grey Lux lights or whatever they're using, they've had a very unusual power demand, and the police have actually looked at that and come in and busted them. So they're absolutely being used to breach our privacy, real big brother issues, and of course health issues. And I think I mentioned before, really good website, stopsmartmeters.org.nz is a bit of an activist site about smart meters. And if you're a conspiracy theorist, do a YouTube search for Technocracy by Patrick Wood. It's a fascinating spin on what's going on with smart meters. Really, really interesting.